Hi everyone, my name is Marlene and thank you so much for joining me at the DataSF conference for my talk. And today I'm going to be speaking to you about Ibis. And the way we are going to be learning a bit more about Ibis is, I think, in a very fun and, dare I say, artistic way by navigating the San Francisco art scene using Ibis. So the first thing I think is good to know is a little bit more about the dataset we will be using and why I personally think it's useful. So DataSF is a group that hosts a number of different datasets, open datasets online that pertain to the city of San Francisco. And for me, I am a developer advocate here at Voltron Data, and usually whenever I've been speaking, even before this, at different Python conferences, and whenever I travel to a new city or a new country, I really enjoy just taking maybe a few days before or after the conference, a TIP conference, to explore that city. And one of my favorite things to do is to take a look at the art or to sort of explore any cultural monuments around. So I was thinking about visiting San Francisco and found that DataSF has a very cool Civic Art collection dataset, and this just contains information about the civic art that is in the city and information about the artists and different pieces and where to find them. And so I thought this was a very useful dataset to stumble upon. So initially, when I wanted to explore this data, I decided to use MySQL and started trying to create this relational database. And it had been a while since I had written SQL queries because I have been using Python for so long and I really enjoy using Python. And so for me, this change to starting to write SQL queries was not as pleasant as I would like to, and I kept thinking, there must be a more Pythonic way to talk to databases. And at the time, I ended up finding out about Ibis. So what is Ibis? So an Ibis is a bird that I have seen several times in Zimbabwe, which is actually where I'm based. And whenever I've seen an ibis, I usually see them when I am taking a trip to, one of the areas where there's lots of wildlife, and I love elephants, and so I usually see ibises actually hanging out around elephants. And so this picture is actually a good metaphor when we are trying to understand what Ibis does. So Ibis is a Python library that provides a more Pythonic way to interact with database engines like MySQL or other different backends as well. And it is really useful because it provides us with this Python Pandas-like interface that is really elegant. I like to think that Python is very elegant and very lightweight and easy to use, like in your Jupyter notebook, but it sits on top of any database that you would like to talk to or interact with. So instead of writing maybe longer queries like we're sometimes used to with MySQL, you can just write your Python code and it will communicate with whatever database you would like to use. So there are several different backends that Ibis supports currently. Some of those include, PySpark, PostgreSQL, Impala, Dask, Pandas, and things like ClickHouse and Data Fusion. And so there's a very wide range of backends or different database engines that you can use with Ibis. And this is very useful if you are in a workflow and maybe writing your code in a Jupyter notebook and you want to keep writing or doing your workflow right there in that same notebook, and you don't have to switch over to writing code in your queries in your terminal. In this talk, mainly, we are going to be exploring what this actually looks like practically. The first step in this process in starting to use Ibis is to install it. So you can install Ibis with pip, and the instruction for that is pip install ibis-framework, and I chose SQLite just to be able to, that allows me to specifically choose the SQLite backend. And the other code there that you can see on the screen is just me setting up a Python dev environment. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to actually grab our data and store it into the SQLite database. So all I did to do this was I went onto DataSF's website. They have the data stored as a CSV file, and I just ran these commands in the terminal to be able to first create a Civic Art database that I saved as civicart.db, and then after that I created a table called Civic Art table that would store the information that was there in my CSV file. And so this is the only sort of queries that this is the only commands that we're gonna write, not in a Jupyter notebook and not in Python. And so now from here, we're going to switch to a Jupyter notebook, which I actually prefer oftentimes to, sometimes using the REPL or using my terminal, especially when I'm doing things like analytics work that I need to share with other people, or maybe if you need to write a report or something like that, using a Jupyter notebook can be one of the best things out there, for me at least. So for the rest of this talk, we are going to be staying in our notebook even as we talk to the database. So first of all, the first thing to do in the notebook is to import Ibis. And to do this, you can just run import Ibis. And then after that, we are going to connect to our Civic Art database, and the way to do that is to just run this ibis.sqlite.connect command, and I'm saving that connection to a variable called db. And so this variable represents the database itself. And so we are then after that going to grab the table, the specific Civic Art table from that database. And to do that, we're just going to use the command db.table and then the name of the table, which is Civic Art table, and save that again to a variable called art. Ibis takes a database table and it allows us to interact with that table in the same way we would use a pandas data frame. Now we are going to take a look at our table and the data that we have in that table. And the first thing to do is we're going to take a look at the columns that we have. And here there's some very interesting and good information for us to have. The artist's name is there, it's just artist. The creation date of the art is also available for us. The location of where the art is. So lots of really helpful information for us in this data set. So next, to get started on our journey through the SF art scene, we are going to go ahead and query our art table. And to do that, you would do it in a similar way as though you were querying a pandas data frame. So I just go ahead and I list out the columns that I specifically would like to take a look at. And for me, I wanted to know the artist's name and to also have an idea of the name of the title of the art that they're displaying. So this on the screen, as you can see, is all the information about the artists and what art they have on display in San Francisco. And the good thing is there is a lot of art in the city, so we are not going to get lost, or no, we might get lost, but we're not going to get bored, which is a good thing because there is so much art. So there's about 1,038 rows, which is really a decent amount of art. Then the next thing we're going to do is figure out how many artists are there in the city. And to be able to do that work on Civic Art, I'm sure there's others that maybe work on art by themselves as well. And to do this, we're going to use the distinct and count command. So I'm just going to grab the artist column and then I'm going to call the distinct method on it. And then I'm going to count those. And we have 386 artists that have contributed to the Civic Art in San Francisco, which is a really good number, I think a very healthy number for a city. And if you want to actually know the methods that are available to you with Ibis tables when you're interacting with Ibis, you can just write out your table name and then type in dot and then type press the tab button, and that will list out all of the available methods. In a similar way to when you're in a Jupyter notebook, you can do the same thing kind of with pandas as well. And then the next thing we're going to do, or the next thing I want to know about, is where the most art is located. So if I am visiting a new city, I want to be able to get the most for my time, the best bang for my buck. And so a great thing to do to be able to find that is actually look for the location that has the most art available. And to do this, I just use a group by command. So I went ahead and decided and grouped the art by the street address. And then after that, I counted the display titles, or the name of the art piece that was present at those different locations or street addresses. And then after that, I sorted the data that we got back by the location and sorted that out in descending order. And so there, as you can see on the screen, actually in first place is an address that is empty. So there were 132 art pieces that actually didn't have an address listed, which I'm sure they're somewhere, but the address was just not listed. And then in second place is actually this location that's 1001 Potrero Avenue, I want to say, and that have 59 art pieces in that specific location. So that's probably where we want to go. But as a side note, I actually, out of curiosity, Googled what this location was. I thought maybe it's an art gallery or something, but it actually turns out to be the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, which is a good thing to know, that there is a lot of art available, civic art there. That's where the most amount is located, I think, which is probably good because we want people to be kind of cheered up by good art in a time where maybe they're not feeling their best. So I think that's a good thing. But anyway, so now that we know where the most amount of art is located in San Francisco, we might want to visit that location. So let's ignore this fact that it's a hospital. But if we wanted to visit that location, another thing to think about is the fact that when you do visit an art scene, maybe someone just random comes to talk to you. And like for me, I like to kind of seem like I know what I'm doing. I don't want to kind of just be asked about the art and have no idea what the person in front of me is talking about. So a good thing to do could be to figure out who the most popular artist at this location is, and just by finding out which artist has the most art at this location. And to be able to do that, I went ahead and I grabbed the street address and artist columns from our dataset, and then I used the filter method to be able to filter out that location and make sure the location we're only getting back the location at 1001 Potrero Avenue, and we are getting the artists at that location as well. And so this was a command that I used, and after doing that, I used an inner join to be able to then find the artist's name and the number of art pieces they had at this location as well. So that's all the code that I used for it, and found out that Mary Fleur McChesney, McChesney actually, had the most art at this location. And so here actually looked up a piece of art, and you can see it on the screen in front of you. So that's actually all the time I have for my talk today. I hope you enjoyed this quick introduction to Ibis by exploring the San Francisco art scene. Then if you would like to know more information about this talk, you can actually take a look. I wrote a blog post on it, so you can visit my website, Mhangami.com, to if you wanted to walk through this step by step. You can also reach out to me at Marlene at VoltronData.com, or reach out to me on Twitter at Marlene_ZW. I always love talking to people on Twitter, so feel free to reach out there. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this talk.